The importance of the 2026 recruiting cycle for the BYU football program and Kalani Sitake cannot be overstated. They got their biggest win to date today as Brock Harris announced that he will be a BYU Cougar.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, your resident BYU insider. A big thank you, as always, to all of you for tuning in and making this your first listen of the day. And more importantly, thank you to all of you who like to call our everydayers out there when it comes to this being your original daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. Special edition here, breaking in midday, because we got breaking news. Brock Harris, a tight end prospect out of Pineview High School down in St. George, Utah, has officially announced that he will be a BYU Cougar. This is a huge recruiting win for BYU, the biggest to date in the 2026 recruiting cycle. I said in the open of today's show that the 2026 class is just critical. The BYU absolutely nails it, and getting a guy like Brock Harris, who is a bona fide four-star prospect, is an incredible way to juice what is already a fairly strong recruiting class, but this is the first four-star commitment of the recruiting cycle, and it should not be the last if BYU really wants to capitalize on their recent run of success in the Big 12. Brock Harris is an absolute machine at tight end, has every skill you want. He's got the height, the weight, the speed, all the ratios you could want from a high school tight end, listed at 6'6", shade under 240 pounds. And as I understand it, runs somewhere in the 4.5-ish range, if not faster than that. He has got everything that you want in terms of what could be the next great tight end at BYU. Now, I have to add this caveat to it. He does have mission plans to go out and serve a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So that will obviously slow down the time in which you will finally see him on the field for BYU. But I don't care when he takes the field for BYU. I absolutely love this commitment for the BYU football program. I have talked to a number of coaches across the state of Utah at the high school ranks. I've talked with people inside the BYU football program, and to a man, every one of them have raved about what Brock Harris brings to the table as a prospect. I'll just read you a quote I actually got last year. So this goes back almost a full year. Goes back to last June when BYU had their BYU football camps and Brock Harris participated in that. I got this quote from a member inside the BYU football program. Said this, quote, "That kid is a physical freak, probably the best looking tight end I've seen at the college level. Mind you, he was a 17-year-old high school junior at that point. Just add that in there. Then he finished it off by saying this. He moves like a wide receiver, but has unreal size. He is so fluid in all of his movements," unquote. That should tell you what people think of what Brock Harris is. He's the number 1 rated or number 2 rated recruit, depending on which recruiting service you look at in the state of Utah. 24/7 Sports has him as the number 2 recruit in their rankings, but the composite ratings have him as the number 1. He is a 4-star prospect across the board, no matter what recruiting rankings you look at. He could end up at the end of this being a 5-star prospect when all is said and done with regards to this recruiting class. But the other thing about this is BYU keeps a kid at home and, more importantly, fends off some of the biggest and baddest names out there in the college football recruiting realm. Look at Georgia. Look at Michigan. Look at Miami. Look at the hated Utah Utes, your arch rival. BYU fended off all of those and more to get Brock Harris to commit to BYU. Yes, he has a BYU legacy. His dad, Todd, did play at BYU back in the day, and that obviously helps to have a guy like that in terms of having the family legacy be at BYU. But this is a top 60 player in this recruiting class. Nationally, the 24/7 Sports Composite have him 56 nationally. Their rankings have him at number 67, but they're fluid and subject to change. And I think if he goes out and has the type of senior season for Pineview this fall that I believe that he can have, you will see his recruiting rankings soar even higher than it already is. And mind you, it's absolutely sky high at the current time. So huge recruiting win for BYU and Kalani Sitake. Kudos need to go out to Aaron Roderick as BYU's offensive coordinator. Kevin Gilbride is BYU's tight ends coach. There was some early consternation out there that when BYU let go of some of their coaching staff a couple of seasons ago, actually a season ago, there was concern that the impact would impact mostly Brock Harris because the tight end position was being turned over. Well, Kevin Gilbride came in and absolutely nailed on the recruiting front. Loved up Brock Harris, made his family feel important, made him feel important, most importantly, and obviously sealed the deal by getting him to agree to sign with the BYU Cougars. You cannot also overlook the fact that NIL played a role here. In this day and age, NIL is a big factor, and this week, it's no coincidence in my mind that Brock Harris signed today or agreed to sign today. He didn't sign formally because he can't do that till the early signing window, but he agreed, I think, in principle on an NIL deal with BYU via the Royal Blue Collective or Coup Connect, whichever one, or maybe both. That is going to make him a very rich young man when he enrolls at BYU. The simple fact of the matter is this week, the House settlement should be settled. And per the parameters of that antitrust the agreement to settle all this antitrust lawsuits that are out there with regards to the NCAA, a lot of young men out there and young women also who are signing pretty lucrative NIL deals this week ahead of that coming into effect, because that will regulate NIL deals more than they've been regulated before. The so-called Wild West of NIL, yeah, that will, in theory, I say theory, end with the House settlement finally being agreed to, decided by Judge Claudia Wilkin out there in Oakland, California. But ahead of that, if you can get the deals locked in now, they can't do anything about it. And I don't think it's a coincidence that Brock Harris is agreed to commit and sign with BYU at this point, because he is trying to cash in on what should be a fairly lucrative, and not fairly, it based on what I understand, a very lucrative NIL deal. And that's just a simple fact of life when it comes to recruiting in this day and age. If you want top tier talent, guess what? You got to pay top tier prices. And we've already seen with BYU basketball, and now it's extending over into BYU football. They're very much willing to wade into those waters and compete, if not outright win, with the resources that have been allotted to Kalani Sitake. In this circumstance, with Brock Harris, what Kevin Young's got with BYU basketball is on a full display with AJ DeBonsa and the rest of the guys that he has signed recently. BYU is an absolute force in the recruiting world, and a big chunk of it is because of their NIL prowess. And that's nothing to snub your nose at, because BYU understands what it takes to play the game. And the nice part is they've got the players, speaking of boosters, and the resources behind them to go out there and be that force in the recruiting world. Now, the other side to this is that Brock Harris is close to Ryder Lyons, a 5-star prospect. We talked about him. If you haven't watched this morning's podcast, we talked about how there's a lot of belief out there that right now the BYU is in the lead for Ryder Lyons. Well, having a guy like Brock Harris, who is very close to Ryder Lyons, I understand that they're very close friends, that cannot hurt in any way BYU's chances of landing Ryder Lyons. Lyons appears to be set to let this ride out and go on his official visits in the month of June, but I would expect that he makes an announcement on his commitment decision shortly thereafter when he makes his official visits when they're all complete. He'll make that announcement, and I would assume that's before he kicks off his senior football season. And fingers crossed it's BYU, because that would just continue the role here that BYU's on in the 2026 recruiting cycle. BYU wants to be a player, if not a juggernaut, in the Big 12 Conference, and getting guys like Brock Harris will go a long way to helping BYU do just that. So congratulations are in order to everybody involved with BYU on this recruiting win. And now the next thing up, who can you go get next to help BYU continue to build into what they hope is a true power in the Big 12 Conference? We'll have plenty of coverage. We'll talk more about this on our next full edition of Locked On Cougars coming to you bright and early tomorrow morning. But as always, thank you for your support of the podcast. Thank you for making it your first listen of the day. And once again, thank you for being everydayers with us right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.